Okay, we are going to talk about document research because when you are doing your essays, it will be expected that you'll do some outside research so that you can add to the content more than what we just went over in class. So when we're talking about document research, specifically, we're going to talk about how to use primary source documents in history. So we have one statement and 5 questions. The first statement is just read the document once, dump your emotions, and read it again, paying attention to the content. Who is the source of the document? What is the period of the document? What is the general history of the period? What is the author's bias? And what is the usefulness of this document to your project? That last question, really make sure you understand and answer that because you can save yourself a lot of time if you don't read things that have absolutely nothing to do with your project or what you're trying to say in your essay. So we're going to practice a bit. If you were in class, we would be taking turns reading this, but since you're watching this remotely, you get to listen to me read it. Okay, so we're just reading this document. Although post-war information has shown that the enemy's losses on this day were only 56, September 15th was the crux of the Battle of Britain. That same night, our bomber command attacked it in strength, the shipping in the ports from Boulogne to Antwerp. At Antwerp, particularly heavy losses were inflicted. On September 17th, as we now know, the Fuhrer decided to postpone Sea Lion indefinitely. It was not till October 12th that the invasion was formally called off till the following spring. In July 1941, it was postponed again by Hitler till the spring of 1942, by which time the Russian campaign will be completed. This was a vain but an important imagining. On February 13, 1942, Admiral Raeder had his final interview on Sea Lion and got Hitler to agree to a complete stand-down. Thus perished Operation Sea Lion, and September 15th may stand as the date of its demise. So we've read the document once, dump your emotions about it, and then read it again, paying attention to the content. I'm not going to read this word for word, but the overall content, I think you've figured out that this is World War II, and this is involving Hitler, the Fuhrer, and there was some kind of a stand-down, the time period, World War II, like I said, and we're specifically talking about something called Operation Sea Lion. So who is the source of this document? Well, it's certainly not written from a German perspective, so I think it would be fair to say the source of this document is Winston Churchill. He was the Prime Minister of Great Britain during the Second World War. The book this quote is found in is called Their Finest Hour. It was published in 1949. So what is the period of the document? As stated above, this quote comes from a book published in 1949. However, within the passage, there is a quote from Adolf Hitler, along with references to 1940, 41, and 42. So you go back to it, you can see the 3 different references. 1941, in July of 1941, there's the quote from Hitler, the spring of 1942, by which time the Russian campaign will be completed. That is what Hitler had said. And then we have February of 1942. And by September 15th, this had all come to pass. So the general history of the period. For this document, it is Second World War, which in the case of Britain, because it was written by Churchill, started in 1939 and it ended in 1945. This war was the bloodiest in human history and ushered in the atomic age and the era of the superpowers. I think that's supposed to say era. So, author's bias. So Churchill is recognized as a fine historian. However, he was an unapologetic imperialist and an advocate of the supremacy of Anglo-American superiority. He despised Adolf Hitler and Nazism with every fiber of his being, and he was in charge of the British government during the period under investigation. Still, his source work is easily checked and cross-referenced. Always check the author's bias, because if you read something written about, say, the bombing of Hiroshima, if you read it from the perspective or an author who was on the American side, it would have a very different bias than somebody who was in Japan at the time and actually experienced it. So just be aware of the author's bias. Doesn't mean you can't use a source, just be aware of it. So what is the usefulness of this document to your project? Your project would be the essay question we give you for your test. So here's an essay question. Let's see. This one says, discuss the career of Gaius Julius Caesar. What was his family background and how did it help him to form his personality? What were his key political and military actions prior to his seizure of power? How did a man who was so accomplished manage to get assassinated? Probably not useful for that essay question. We have this one. Discuss the rule of Napoleon. How did he seize power in France? What raised him to the level of military dictator? Did he make any serious military mistakes that hastened his eventual end? That probably has nothing to do with what you just read from Winston Churchill. So again, back to reading the document once, dump your emotions, read it again, and answer these questions. Who is the source of the document? What is the period of the document? What is the general history of the period? What is the author's bias? What is the usefulness of this project? And then, of course, we have one more essay question. Discuss the careers of Nicholas Copernicus, Galileo Galilei, and Isaac Newton. How did each of these scientists view the question of heliocentrism, and how did they support their argument? Guys, these are just examples of what your essay questions are. So those 3 essay questions, this particular document would not support. However, if we had a question about World War II and the British and Operation Sea Lion, then that would be relevant. So now that you've seen my presentation on this, I would like you to watch a video from Illinois University that will give you some more ideas about primary source documents, I should say.